So what attracted you guys to the project when you first pitched on it?
They told me Wyatt Russell was doing it.
They told me Brent Jennings was doing it.
Well, that's not possible. Somebody had to go first.
No, really, honestly, it was just the material. It was just that it was a darn good script. The tone of it was different. The characters were jumping off the page. Not just the character I was reading for, but, who he was relating to. And, it was very human, very funny in a different way, and very serious in a different way. So I just thought the material was very rich, and wanted to be a part of it.
Yeah. Jim Gavin and Peter Ocko threatened to cut off my fingers. But it's the same. I read it before it had been greenlit to go to series, and it was just something that I wanted to do because it was unique. Hadn't read something like it before. It spun a tale. It spun a fable that was interesting. The Kingdom of Long Beach was a character. I'm from California, from Los Angeles. I know Long Beach pretty well. I grew up going there probably every day from the time I was about 11 to 16. And it has a real interest. It's a very interesting character in the show in that there's kind of no place like Long Beach. There's no place like anywhere, but Long Beach is specific because you have the Queen Mary and the beach on one hand, and then you have sort of the inner city of Long Beach, which is industrial gangs. There's crime, there's issues, but it's not something that's talked about a lot nowadays. I think back in
it's not
90s,
like San Diego, it's not like LA.
Right.
It's California. It has all the California environment, but it's a very kind of real people place.
Right.
Everyday people. It feels that way, at least.
Yeah, and that. I thought that was a really interesting. They capture that Jim captures it very well.
Right.
So, yeah.
One of the things about the show is that lodge culture has such strange rituals and details to it, and there's so many different groups out there. Did you do much research, and what were some of the weird quirks and interesting details that you found when preparing for the show?
Well, sadly enough, we're supposed to do research, actors. I didn't.
So you just know the lodge you're playing.
Yeah, that
okay, so what's the weirdest thing about that particular lodge then?
Right. Well, it was, I guess, the alchemy. Alchemy. Am I saying it right?
Yeah.
That's how much I researched it. It's this sort of the philosophy that the Blaze is sort of the expert of. Our resident apothecarist, and this whole thing of alchemy and finding the true lodge and the secrets of the universe. And I guess alchemy in the real world was a precursor to chemistry or something, but so it's just so that whole thing was just made me say, well, let me deal with Ernie and what he's doing. But that's something we did a little research on,
and I think that part of it is that in our space that the real alchemy takes place in the journey of what you're doing. It's not about the actual thing that you're not actually trying to turn lead into gold. It's a metaphor. It's an allegory.
Okay.
And so I think that part of that is the mythology of our own lodge was based off of other things, but it was important that the mythology of our lodge tracked with what we were doing. It wasn't a part of anybody else's.
Right. But that was unique, I would say, to Lodge 49.
Right.
Right. And
the story of the pilot especially, but the story of the show in general is about Dud's journey to joining the lodge and what brings him there and all that kind of thing. Is that something that we understand about Ernie as well? Is that something the idea of what got him into this place where we meet him, where he's been there for years?
Well, as the show goes on, you'll find out more about how Ernie got connected to the lodge, and it's not that dissimilar from Dud's way.
Mm-hmm.
What was your question?
Basically, if you have a sense of what it was,
Yeah,
that
you
his
will.
character journey.
When you,
right.
By the time you watch the first few episodes, you will come to see how Ernie became attached to the lodge, what brought him there, and what has kept him there. And it's become a place that he's sort of adopted and wants to be the leader of.
Right.
You know, to kind of move up the ladder there in terms of responsibility. So yeah, that becomes evident. I don't want to
Spoiled. You don't want to spoil
it.
anything.
No,
Yeah.
no.
So one of the interesting things about Dud is that he's such an easygoing guy. He really carries the comedy of the show, but then he also has so much sadness to him and so much tragedy in his backstory. Was that something that was challenging to play, this idea of what was happening underneath the surface?
Was it challenging? I think it was only challenging in that getting across what Jim wanted to get across in the script was something that, you know, I wanted to be able to nail, and that realizing pretty soon in the process that it was either going to happen or it wasn't, and that's part of the show. It's either you're going to take on, as my character, I sort of have to take on the tone of the show. So either if you feel it, you feel it, and if you don't, you don't, and that's okay because that's what the words are telling you, how it's making you feel. So I didn't put too much pressure on myself to make anything happen, because that would have been wrong and sort of out of context with what the show's trying to do.
Right.
You know, right? Mm-hmm. So that's I wouldn't have. It was. I guess every time you go and you act, it's like a challenge because you got to get to the place that you want to get to.
Mm-hmm.
But this was really fun because everybody was in it together, made it easy, made it fun. Never felt like I had to go to work one day I was there. So
yeah, we all felt we were doing something different. I mean,
Yeah.
material-wise, and something special, and everyone felt like they had come across a gem, and they were GEM, and they were happy to be a part of it. And I think that allows actors to sort of open up and accept each other and work together a lot. You know, just get to it right quick, because everyone becomes more giving when you feel like so you're doing something special. So I think it fed into all of that, what we're talking about in terms of he had the space to do what he had to do, and I had the space to do what I had to do, because we were all, you know, just kind of going with it and committed to it, and it made it easy, whatever we had to do.
You have a ton of TV work on your resume, but
Yeah,
not a
people
lot.
keep telling me that. Yeah.
We are IMDb people before we come.
Yeah.
But one of the interesting things to note about your IMDb is that you haven't done anything for more than 4 episodes before. Has it been really interesting to get to stay with a character sort of long term?
Yeah, it's like theater. You know, it was my theater background really kind of, you know, came to fore, you know, on this. But it is interesting, you know, and it'd be more interesting to, if we get a second season, to see how, if I can keep it interesting for me, you know, because you're right, I haven't developed that muscle of except for on stage, keeping something going, you know, for a long period of time, and that's a part of me that wonders, like, at what point do you not get bored with hearing your own voice or saying the same thing, or, you know, how
about
do you...
10 minutes ago.
He's bored already, okay.
Yeah, during interviews, Carey saying the answers on
the sound of your own voice.
Right. You know, so yeah, I do think about that. You know, you're right. That's something that I've never experienced. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know.
So something that I asked the other guys as well, and they had a really hard time answering, is two sides of the same question. First, in a sort of superficial way, what is the show about, just in terms of story? And that was surprisingly hard for this show. But then, on a more thematic level, what do you think that the show is about in a larger sense?
I think that what you've got to try and do there is meld those two things together. The idea of the show is that what you're seeing on the surface is not what you're seeing underneath, and what you're seeing underneath is not what you're seeing on the surface, and that those two worlds collide. That's the idea behind what the show's trying to do, is saying, get your mind off of trying to figure it out. There's a great line in a movie called "What the Bleep Do We Know?" It was like a movie in the like late '90s, early 2000s, and there's a I think he's a psychologist or he's a neuroscientist, something. He's a doctor, he's a professor at UCLA, and he's sitting in the courtyard and waxing poetic about something, and then he just goes, "But you know what? The best thing to do is don't try and solve the mystery, just be part of it." And I think that there's a large aspect to our show that superficially, yes, you're going on a journey, but underneath the surface, all of the information that you're getting about what the journey is what the journey's about. So you can try and figure it out all you want, but I can almost promise you're never going to figure it out. And that's sort of what the show is about, below and beneath the surface.
Right.
Nothing to add. I concur. So this is a TV festival. We're all here because we love TV. What's your all-time favorite TV show?
Oh, wow.
Breaking Bad.
Oh, right there, right at the surface. Got that ready.
Yeah. I'll go with that.
Oh, you're in agreement?
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
It's the best TV show.
Yeah, I'd have to say so. Yeah.
Okay. On the flip side, so anytime I meet someone who's from an acting family, I always have to ask, what is the project that you most make fun of your family member for having been a part of? Any family member you want.
Oh my God. Most make fun of?
Yeah, like bring up at like Thanksgiving, like remember that really embarrassing thing you did.
Oh my God. I really like my family members' movies.
What's your favorite then? It's an easier question.
It's funny. The movie called Used Cars that my dad did in 1980.
I remember that movie.
And it's a good movie. And
was Danny DeVito in that movie?
No, it was Bob Zemeckis' second movie. The first one he did was the Hold My Hand. It was the Beatles movie. I can't remember what it was called, but it was his second movie, and it's Bob Zemeckis at his absolute best, in my opinion. And it's weirdly kind of similar in tone to our show in certain ways. I think Jim, that's a movie that Jim really liked. It's a very culty movie. When you watch it, I think there is some aspects of Used Cars that are inside of Lodge. In a fun way, it creates... Again, Used Cars is a very small, tiny town, but there's a kingdom, people fighting for power, but everything is just kind of like, it looks like shit everywhere around. It's like nothing's worth fighting for, but the people are worth fighting for. And it's all told in a very comedic way. You have to fit together little pieces of the puzzle to make sure, that's gonna happen, that happened because that happened. So that was not the answer to your question of what we make fun of most, but I
just think it's funny picturing people making fun of big projects at Thanksgiving
dinner.
I
know. I don't know.
He certainly had enough movies in his family.
Yeah, I know. I don't know. I can't think of one that I'm like, oh, ha.
And no one wants to be cruel,
Yeah.
Oh,
no, it's not being cruel.
To like your brother? Sure, why not?
Why did you?
That's what family is for, man.
Yeah.
You don't have to answer.
Sorry, I can't think of it. To be honest, I really can't. I can't think of what.
Well, that's kind of lovely.
Yeah.
That's the takeaway.
Yeah.
So what would you say, sort of as a final thought, if you're pitching fans on why they should tune into this show? What are your final takeaways of what makes this show special and why it's not something they want to miss?
You ask really thought-provoking questions.
Thank you.
I would say watch this show because it's not like any other show on television. You don't have to dumb yourself down to enjoy it. In fact, you have to be able to sit down and just watch it and go with it. There's an innocence about it. There's a purity about it. There's a fun at the core of it. At the spirit of it is let's all get together and enjoy life as we box and fight with it. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Let's enjoy the fight. Let's enjoy the struggle, and let's have fun. And I think that's uplifting today. And I think people will enjoy that. You don't have to watch anybody get maimed. You don't have to watch, you can just watch people being people that you recognize, and you can see yourself in their struggles and in their, their journeys.
It's really well said, and don't have anything to add.
So what attracted you to the project?
Oh, you were first. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
I have a company with Paul Giamatti. The script got sent to us, and it just stood out from the start. I mean, it's an unusual script. And we jumped in and went to find a home for it.
Yeah? And how did you get involved?
I had been approached by AMC to do something with them, and they sent me a bunch of scripts, and the same experience. I read a bunch, and there was a lot of stories that felt like, oh, I know what this TV show is. And Jim's felt like, I have no idea what this series is, but I love these people in this place, and I laughed out loud more than I had on anything else. And I think it feels like a great match, too, because AMC was into this idea of doing a show that was way more in a comic universe, in a sense, than a really gritty one, and that was a great challenge. It felt exciting.
Yeah. Well, your resume is packed with like incredibly diverse shows that are totally different in tone. What is it that is sort of unifying in terms of what you're looking for when you're picking a project?
I have such a short attention span. I really love being on shows when they begin, and I've always leaned towards shows that... My favorite shows that I've worked on have existed in a real universe with one element that's twisted, but the characters are real people. It's not like they have to become magical themselves. There's an element within the universe that's a little magical, and I think Jim just effortlessly created a place that both suggests, oh, this is a relatable place with people I've seen before, but there's something going on beneath the surface, and it's really exciting to be in that place.
And the show had a really long development process and changed a lot over the course of the development. What were some of the most interesting evolutions you saw from the start to what is now happening?
I mean, everything I've worked on, I feel like, has taken years. Even the things that you think are going along fast, when you actually get them made, you look back and you're like, oh my gosh, I've been working on this for 5 years. So in that sense, not totally unusual, but it had a meandering path. I think it had a meandering path and ended up coming full circle back to right what it wanted to be at the outset. And in a way, that was the hardest thing, was to like find the way to trust Jim's vision for what it was and just follow that.
Right. And you have a lot of unscripted work on your resume. How has that sensibility and that experience really factored into your work that you're doing here?
I did work in documentary for a long while, early on. I mean, in a way, I think it factors into this, and one of the things I loved about this is it has sort of an embrace of the ordinary, plain world. I mean, there's a magical element, but there's also an element of just kind of trying to make sure it stays grounded in the world as it is.
And tell us a little bit about casting and how you found these particular actors and what they brought to the part in terms of how you originally envisioned it when you read it versus what's happening, what we can see on screen.
I think we all carried in our mind a very clear idea of Dud, just reading the script. And to be honest, when we saw Wyatt, and it wasn't like we had a casting call either. I saw him in a movie. Dan was familiar with him. He was Dud. Like, it was surprising how it just felt like we had a list of one. And then Jim and I sat down with him, we had lunch with him, and it was like eating with Dud. Except a Dud who could step out of himself and be a super smart person outside of that and kind of look down and say why I'm doing these choices. So Wyatt it's an incredible match for us. I mean, that was nuts. And I would say we went through, once we had Wyatt, finding Brent was equally exciting because, again, he sort of stood out of the pack as being Ernie. And I've cast a lot of stuff before, and I'm sure, Dan, we've been through this. Sometimes you have all these tough choices and you're trying to figure it out. Sometimes the actors sort of present themselves like they've been waiting for you, and in a way that was, I think, Brent, and for Sonia too. We found her in London, and Jim and I never thought we would find Liz anywhere outside of Southern California. And, she has this proper British accent, and then she just slips into Liz, and it's like, oh my God, that's Liz.
Right.
Hey, it's Liz. Oh, that's Liz. Okay. So, we were lucky.
Right. So lodge culture has all sorts of like crazy realities to it, lots of weird traditions and things. What are some of the weird details you've discovered doing like research for this project?
I think, what's amazing to me is you look at all the existing stuff out there on the Elks or the Masons or whatever, and there's this wonderful, I mean, the first thing you notice is they'll talk in terms of like, I mean, for us, it's like luminous night and squire, as if they're saying vice president, treasurer. Like, they've so internalized it that it's not strange to them. But to the rest of the world, you're like, wow, that's crazy. And I think that sort of juxtaposition is really interesting for us. So, yeah,
so one of the questions I like to ask all people who are working on a long-term project is, first of all, what, on superficially speaking, in terms of like story, what is Lodge 49 about? And then in a larger sense, in a sort of more thematic, big emotional sense, what is Lodge 49 about?
the first question, I would just like to just sit here with a dumb expression on my face. Because it's really hard. It's about so many things. I think, we're just begging people to watch it and then we'll talk about it. But at its heart, I'd say it's about Dud's kind of quest to reclaim the happy life he had. And for him, it wasn't an aspirational, like, he's not looking for success or money, or he just wants to get back to the, like, he got up in the morning, went surfing, worked at his dad's pool shop, and then had a few beers and went to bed, and that was utter happiness. And he took it for granted, and now that he's lost all that, tripping into the lodge gives him this hope that he can find a path back. And it's both irrational, but it's also, you kind of think this might happen. And if you tune in for the season, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised.
Do you have an answer?
I guess I would just expand on that to say that I think, Dud is the primary character on that journey. I think he meets a lot of other people who are also just trying to find a simple life that has meaning for them. And I think the lodge is that place where they make the connections that they can find, those simple things in their lives that make it worthwhile.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Paul, who you have your production company with, and he's certainly name recognition-wise right up front in terms of the advertising of the show. What role is he playing in terms of the creation process, if any?
He's been involved in conversation about it from the start. I'm not sure that his career would make it obvious, but the themes of this show, everything from the esoteric of alchemy to the lodges, is very close to his heart. So he's been embraced it from the start and been a big part of the conversations.
Yeah, no, and he's looped in on everything, and certainly, especially in casting too, just having his sort of sense of what works and what doesn't has been invaluable all along. And he as Dan says, he loves every piece of this. He's spent a lot of time on set, and it's a place he feels very comfortable and at home in the lodge.
Can you tell us a little bit about the process of running a show that you didn't create yourself? So working in collaboration with that original creator and sort of ushering their vision, but also really contributing your own.
Yeah, I mean, for me, this has been such a pleasure because of who Jim is, just the human being of Jim Gavin. He hasn't done any television before, so he comes at it from this very fresh place, and that's been great, just as a partner in the world. Like, we've worked really well together. I think for me, the challenge and that I really loved about it was, how do you make that initial pilot a series? And I think that collaboration was really exciting for me, and I've done this for a long time, and I felt like that sort of the moment where we kind of looked at it and said, well, maybe this is a Knight Squire journey, and it's a fable in a sense. Like, that opened up what was a wonderful story in a world to this sort of bigger place, and I think for us that was a huge step that made it a series. And so I felt that process has been really satisfying, and it's such a collaboration. I think moving forward, it's always hard to join something that knows so carefully what it is, and Jim loves this world and these people, so I really wanted to be careful coming in, because you can't just swagger in and say, like, here's how television works, because he really had such a sense of the world that it made it easy.
Right. In terms of your approach to long-term storytelling and episodic storytelling, how much of a plan do you like to have in terms of the direction of the story in a larger sense versus really being reactive and adapting as you go along?
I think in this show it's really important to at least know some of the basics that are underneath everything. which I will not disclose. But I will
Please
say,
don't.
like, I've been very frustrated with some shows that have thrown stuff at an audience and then sort of figured it out later. That's not this show. I think there's a lot that we will discover along the way, but I know that we know the sort of basics of what this universe is, and we knew that before we even started episode 2. So,
From a creative point of view, what would be your ideal length for the series to run?
that feels like a trick question. I think forever, but we've envisioned, I don't know what's the right answer, 4 or 5. I think, yeah. I think we would love to be a show that did find a natural end, because it's not meant to be an endless universe. This is a series of quests for a knight and squire, and those stories don't go on forever.
Yeah.
In terms of what you have an idea of what's underneath everything, do you have sort of season 1, or do you have the finale?
We know where we're headed.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say we know exactly where we're headed, but we know enough to feel there is an end.
And if you were pitching the show to an average TV viewer, and what is a show from either television history that's on now that you can say to someone, if you like that show, you should definitely check out this?
Oh, man. I hate that question.
Oh, sorry. You can turn the question into whatever you want.
I don't feel an encyclopedic mind snap in with
right.
it's this plus this. I think we live in a universe, just because it's fresh on my mind, and we are very different in many ways from this show, but the comedic sense of Killing Eve, the way that is a funny show that is not a comedy, but it is, I think that is something we have in common, and I think it's kind of I love that show, and I love how it makes you feel you're in the real world, but there's something with the volume turned up. There's things going on beneath the surface. In their case, it's CIA intrigue. We're doing something completely different here,
right.
But I think the feeling of that is similar to our show.
Right. And speaking of, you're not a CIA intrigue show. You're not a case by case show. Do you find yourself sort of searching for plot in that way that personal shows sometimes can, ones that are just about people and not about cases?
I mean, I think it's like a great novel. The plot comes from the people. I mean, I think that's one of its virtues. Is it doesn't feel like somebody's trying to build the architecture of a plot. You're just following people's lives, and if you care about them enough, you care what happens next.
And like a good book, I'd say that we were really lucky to be able to finish 10 scripts before we shot, so that stuff that's potentially sort of mentioned offhand, actually, there's, like a good book, nothing's there by accident.
Right. And just one last question. What is the sort of message you'd like to send to people who are contemplating watching the show to really sell them on why it's important that they watch it?
If TV feels like homework to you, like you've got this backed up DVR and you're just like, oh, another show, this show is actually an antidote. Because it's a joyride. And that's what we set out to do, because I think we had the same exhaustion as television viewers in the world these days. There's so much stuff. We just wanted to watch something that wasn't going to grab you by the ears and make you watch. It was just going to be the show off to the side, like smoking a cigarette, going, yeah, you want us? Go, come over. We don't care. And I think that's a pleasant relief.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much, guys.